Think you know everything about classic westerns? This dark 1943 masterpiece hid bizarre casting demands, wartime construction limits, reverse knife tricks, and a haunting connection to Henry Fonda's traumatic childhood. From Mae West's rejected role to a director who literally bought the film rights just to avoid her, these shocking secrets reveal why this movie almost never made it to theaters. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Oxbow incident. Fact 1. The bizarre Mae West casting demand. Before the Oxbow incident could become the powerful anti-lynching Western we know today, director William Wellman faced an absurd obstacle that nearly derailed the entire project. When Wellman first fell in love with Walter Van Tilburg Clark's novel and wanted to adapt it for the screen, he discovered that the rights holders had attached a bizarre condition to any film deal. They insisted that Mae West, the flamboyant comedy star known for her suggestive one-liners and burlesque persona, must be cast in the adaptation. Wellman found this demand completely ridiculous, and it's easy to see why. The Oxbow incident is a serious, somber examination of mob justice and vigilante violence set in 1885 Nevada. Mae West's signature style of bawdy humor and exaggerated sensuality would have been entirely out of place in this grim morality tale about innocent men being lynched by a bloodthirsty mob. The rights holders apparently envisioned some version of the story that would revolve around West playing a saloon hostess, completely missing the point of Clark's powerful novel. Rather than compromise his artistic vision or try to shoehorn the comedy star into a story where she simply didn't belong, Wellman took matters into his own hands. He purchased the film rights himself from producer Harold Hurley for $6,500, effectively buying his way out of the Mae West requirement. This personal financial investment demonstrated just how committed Wellman was to making the film his way, without studio interference or inappropriate casting choices that would have undermined the story's serious themes. It was a bold move that allowed Wellman to proceed with creating one of Hollywood's most uncompromising westerns, though getting the green light from a major studio would prove to be its own challenge. Fact 2. Wellman's Devil's Bargain with Zanuck. Even after William Wellman bought the rights to the Oxbow incident with his own money, he still needed a major studio to finance and distribute the film, and that's where his troubles really began. When Wellman approached 20th Century Fox production chief Darryl F. Zanuck about making the movie, Zanuck was deeply skeptical about the whole project. The studio head worried that American audiences, especially during the early years of World War II, simply weren't ready for a film that centered on lynching and ended tragically with innocent men being hanged. Zanuck feared that moviegoers wanted escapist entertainment to distract them from the war, not a dark meditation on mob violence and failed justice. The film had no love interest, hardly any women in the cast at all, and its message was profoundly pessimistic about human nature. Everything about it seemed designed to fail at the box office. However, Wellman was persistent and reminded Zanuck that he had successfully delivered socially conscious films before, including The Public Enemy in 1931 and A Star is Born in 1937. Finally, Zanuck agreed to produce The Oxbow Incident, but he extracted a steep price for his cooperation. The studio chief made Wellman promise that he would also direct 2 other films for Fox, projects that Zanuck would choose and that Wellman would have no say in selecting. These films turned out to be Thunderbirds in 1942 and Buffalo Bill in 1944, both far more conventional and commercially safe productions that held little artistic interest for Wellman. It was essentially a devil's bargain, where Wellman traded several years of his career making movies he didn't care about in exchange for the chance to make one film that truly mattered to him. This arrangement shows just how difficult it was to get unconventional projects made in the Hollywood studio system. Fact 3. Gary Cooper turned down the lead role. The role of Gil Carter, the morally conflicted cowboy who witnesses the lynching at the heart of the Oxbow incident, was originally intended for one of Hollywood's biggest Western stars, Gary Cooper. Cooper was already well established as a leading man in the genre, having starred in classics like The Virginian and The Plainsman, and his name would have brought significant star power to this risky, unconventional project. However, when the role was offered to Cooper, he turned it down, passing on what would become one of the most memorable parts in any Western of the 1940s. His reasons for declining aren't fully documented, but it's easy to imagine that Cooper, like studio chief Darryl Zanuck, may have had concerns about the film's dark subject matter and uncommercial tone. Cooper's rejection opened the door for Henry Fonda to take the role, and this turned out to be a stroke of good fortune for everyone involved. Fonda was under contract with 20th Century Fox at the time, and was deeply unhappy with most of the films the studio forced him to make. He later referred to Fox as Penitentiary Fox, because he felt trapped making movies he didn't believe in. Out of all the films he made during this contract period, Fonda identified only two that he was genuinely enthusiastic about starring in. One was The Grapes of Wrath in 1940, where he gave his iconic performance as Tom Joad. The other was The Oxbow Incident. Fonda's personal connection to the film's anti-lynching theme, combined with his understated acting style that could convey moral complexity, without grandstanding, made him perfect for the role. His performance as Gil Carter became one of the highlights of his career, proving that sometimes rejected roles find their way to exactly the right actor. Fact X4. Fonda witnessed a real lynching as a teen. Henry Fonda's passionate commitment to making The Oxbow Incident wasn't just about artistic integrity or finding a good role during his unhappy time at Fox. The film connected to a traumatic childhood experience that haunted him for his entire life and shaped his views on justice and mob violence. On the night of September 28, 1919, when Fonda was just 14 years old, his father took him to the printing office the family owned in Omaha, Nebraska. This wasn't a normal visit, and young Henry was puzzled about why his father was bringing him to the empty office on a Sunday evening. From a second-story window overlooking the courthouse square, Fonda witnessed one of the most horrendous sights of his life. A black man named Will Brown was being lynched by a white mob during the Omaha race riots. Brown had been accused of assaulting a white woman, a crime that investigators were certain he had not committed. The violent mob stripped Brown, beat him, hanged him from a lamppost, burned his body on a bonfire, dragged it through the streets behind a car, and cut up the lynching rope to sell as souvenirs. Fonda only spoke about witnessing this nightmare near the end of his life, in a 1975 interview. He described the physical details he remembered: walking across the empty office at night, the unusual feeling of being there after hours, and looking out that window. The memory was seared into him permanently. This traumatic experience made Fonda a lifelong opponent of racism and vigilante justice. When the opportunity came to star in a film that powerfully condemned lynching and mob rule, Fonda knew he had to be part of it. In some way, by making The Oxbow Incident, Fonda was trying to save Will Brown, to turn on the light and show the world what men do in darkness when they abandon the rule of law. Fact 5. Wartime production forced a week-long shutdown. Making a movie during World War II came with challenges that modern filmmakers never have to consider, and The Oxbow Incident faced an unusual production obstacle that had nothing to do with artistic differences or budget concerns. In August of 1942, right in the middle of filming, the entire production was forced to shut down for a week to 10 days because of wartime restrictions on construction materials. The War Production Board, the government agency responsible for managing resources during the war effort, had imposed a strict $5,000 per film limit on new construction materials to ensure that vital supplies like lumber, metal, and other building resources went to the military instead of Hollywood movie sets. The Oxbow Incident had already exhausted its allocation of new CUS materials, but the production still needed to build the crucial mountain pass set where much of the film's dramatic action would take place. The solution was both creative and labor-intensive. During the forced shutdown, the crew had to tear down sets that had already been used earlier in the production so that their materials could be salvaged and repurposed to construct the mountain pass location. This meant physically dismantling existing structures, carefully sorting through the lumber and other components, and then rebuilding everything from scratch using only these recycled materials. The entire process added significant time to the production schedule and created logistical headaches for everyone involved. This wartime restriction is a fascinating reminder of how World War II affected every aspect of American life, even reaching into the Hollywood dream factory. While movie studios were creating escapist entertainment for audiences dealing with the stress of war, they were also operating under the same material constraints that affected every other industry in the country. Fact 6. Fox built their largest set. Ever one of the most ironic aspects of the Oxbow incident's production is that despite being made on an extremely tight budget with severe wartime restrictions on new construction materials, the film ended up featuring the largest set that 20th Century Fox had ever constructed up to that point. Studio chief Darryl Zanuck had insisted that the film be shot as cheaply as possible, primarily on studio backlots and sound stages rather than expensive location shooting, to minimize the financial risk of this uncommercial project. The studio publicity department, always looking for impressive statistics to promote their films, proudly announced that the Oxbow Valley setting covered an astounding 26,703 square feet, which works out to more than half an acre. This massive set had to be built almost entirely from recycled materials due to the War Production Board's restrictions, making the achievement even more impressive. The confined studio setting that Zanuck demanded as a cost-saving measure actually ended up working in the film's favor artistically. The obviously artificial mountains painted on backdrops and the claustrophobic feel of the soundstage locations created an expressionistic, almost nightmarish atmosphere that perfectly matched the story's dark themes about mob psychology and moral decay. Director William Wellman used the studio-bound limitations to his advantage, employing dramatic lighting and tight framing to focus attention on the actors' faces and the psychological tension between characters rather than expansive Western landscapes. The large Oxbow set also had life beyond this one film. The Western street set that appears in the Oxbow incident was subsequently reused in another Western, The Gunfighter, released in 1950 and starring Gregory Peck, proving that even Depression-era Hollywood knew how to stretch its resources. Fact 7. The film sat on the shelf for months after William Wellman and his cast and crew finished filming the Oxbow incident in August of 1942. Everyone involved probably expected the movie to be released fairly quickly, as was typical in the studio system of that era. Instead, the completed film sat on a shelf at 20th Century Fox for months while studio executives scratched their heads trying to figure out what to do with it. The problem was exactly what Darryl Zanuck had feared from the beginning. Nobody knew how to market such a dark, depressing Western to audiences in the middle of World War II. This wasn't a film where the hero saves the day, justice prevails, and everyone rides off into the sunset. It was a grim story about innocent men being lynched by a mob, with no love story, no big action sequences, and an ending that left viewers feeling ashamed and horrified rather than entertained. The marketing department couldn't figure out how to sell this to the American public, especially wartime audiences who came to movie theaters looking for escapist entertainment that would help them forget about the war for a couple of hours. How do you convince people to pay money to watch a movie that will make them feel terrible? The studio's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. When the film was finally released in May of 1943, it received positive reviews from critics who recognized its artistic merit and powerful message, but it was indeed a commercial failure, earning only $750,000 in the United States. The New York Times reviewer praised the film's all-around excellent cast, but noted that it was hard to imagine a picture with less promise commercially. This shelf delay represented the studio's last-ditch attempt to figure out a marketing angle that simply didn't exist. Fact 8. Fonda took a pay cut to be in it. Henry Fonda's determination to appear in the Oxbow incident went far beyond simply accepting the role when it was offered to him. The actor was so passionate about being part of this anti-lynching film, driven by his traumatic childhood memory of witnessing Will Brown's lynching in Omaha, that he agreed to accept a reduced salary to ensure he could be in the cast. This was a significant financial sacrifice for Fonda, who was already unhappy with his contract at 20th Century Fox and the quality of most films the studio was forcing him to make. Taking a pay cut meant giving up real money, not just symbolic amounts, at a time when actors under the studio contract system had limited control over their own careers and income. The fact that Fonda was willing to work for less money demonstrates just how important this project was to him personally and politically. He saw the Oxbow incident as more than just another job or another Western. It was an opportunity to make a statement about vigilante justice, mob violence, and the importance of due process and the rule of law, themes that connected directly to the lynching he had witnessed as a teenager. For an actor who spent much of his 20th Century Fox contract period feeling like he was wasting his talent on mediocre projects, the Oxbow incident represented a rare chance to appear in something meaningful, and he was willing to pay for that opportunity out of his own pocket. Fonda's commitment extended beyond the financial sacrifice as well. Immediately after filming was completed, he enlisted in the United States Navy to serve in World War II, saying he didn't want to be in a fake war in a studio while real war was happening. He served for 3 years and won the Bronze Star for his service in the Pacific Theater. His willingness to take a pay cut for the Oxbow incident was just one example of how Fonda put his principles ahead of his personal financial interests. Fact 9. 3 actresses played one role. The role of Jenny Ma Greer, the tough, masculine cattlewoman who becomes one of the most bloodthirsty members of the lynch mob, had a troubled journey to the screen that involved 3 different actresses before filming was finally completed. The character, as written, was unconventional for the time period. A woman rancher who wore men's clothing, spoke roughly, and had no interest in traditional feminine behavior or appearance. This made casting the role both important and challenging. The studio originally cast Sarah Allgood, an Irish actress who had appeared in numerous films throughout the 1930s and early 40s, to play Ma Greer. However, for reasons that aren't entirely clear from the historical record, Allgood was replaced before filming began by Florence Bates, a character actress known for playing stern, intimidating women. Bates seemed like a good fit for the role and began working on the production. Then disaster struck during the filming of a horseback riding scene. Bates was injured badly enough that she could not continue in the role, necessitating yet another replacement. This was a serious problem for the production because they had already filmed scenes with Bates, and stopping to recast and reshoot everything would have been expensive and time-consuming. The studio brought in Jane Darwell, a veteran character actress who would be familiar to modern audiences as the bird woman who feeds the birds in Mary Poppins, though she was better known at the time for playing Maud Jode in The Grapes of Wrath just a few years earlier. Darwell appears in the finished film as Ma Greer, giving a memorable performance as one of the few female members of the posse and one of the most enthusiastic supporters of the lynching. The multiple casting changes meant that 3 different actresses were attached to the same role during the production of the Oxbow incident. Fact 10. The knife trick was done in reverse. One of the most dramatic moments in the Oxbow incident comes when Juan Martinez, the Mexican member of the accused trio played by Anthony Quinn, attempts to escape from the posse holding him captive. In a sudden burst of action, Martinez throws a knife that lands right next to the foot of Farnley, one of the men guarding him, narrowly missing but serving as a clear warning and threat. It's a tense moment that demonstrates Martinez's skill and desperation, and it looks impressive on screen. However, if you watch the scene very carefully, you can spot the trick that the filmmakers used to create this dramatic effect. Look closely at the knife as it flies through the air and lands at Farnley's feet, and you'll notice a thin wire attached to the end of the blade. This wire gives away the secret of how the shot was actually accomplished. The scene wasn't filmed with Quinn actually throwing a knife toward another actor's foot, which would have been extremely dangerous and difficult to do accurately. Instead, the filmmakers placed the knife on the ground next to the actor's foot, attached a thin wire to it, and then pulled the knife backward away from the foot using the wire. Once they had this footage of the knife moving away from the actor, they simply played the film in reverse, creating the illusion that the knife was flying through the air toward the target and landing precisely where it needed to be. This technique was fairly common in old Hollywood when filmmakers needed to create dangerous-looking stunts or precise actions that would have been too difficult or risky to perform live. While the wire is visible if you know to look for it, most viewers watching the film for the first time won't notice this detail and will simply see an exciting moment of tension and action. Fact 11. It's the last Best Picture-only nominee. The Oxbow incident holds a unique and somewhat bittersweet distinction in Oscar history that makes it stand out among all Academy Award-nominated films. When the film received its sole nomination for Best Picture at the 16th Academy Award ceremony, held on March 2, 1944, it became part of a very exclusive club, and not necessarily one that any film would want to join. The Oxbow Incident was nominated only for Best Picture and received no other nominations in any other category whatsoever. No acting nominations, no directing nomination for William Wellman, no screenplay or cinematography or music nominations, nothing. Just that one nomination for the top prize. This particular circumstance had happened 16 times between 1927 and 1943, but as of today, in 2025, The Oxbow Incident remains the last film whose sole Oscar nomination was in the Best Picture category. No movie since then has received a Best Picture nomination without also being nominated in at least one other category. This unusual distinction says something interesting about how the Academy voters viewed the film. They clearly recognized its overall quality and importance as a complete work of cinema, finding it worthy to compete for the industry's highest honor alongside films like Casablanca, which ultimately won that year. However, they apparently couldn't identify any individual element of the production that stood out enough to merit its own nomination. The film lost to Casablanca, which is hardly a shameful defeat given that Casablanca is one of the most beloved films ever made. Nevertheless, the Oxbow Incident's position as the last Best Picture only nominee makes it a fascinating footnote in Oscar history and a reminder of how unusual and unclassifiable the film was when it was released. Fact 12. The letter wasn't in the original novel. One of the most emotionally powerful moments in the Oxbow Incident comes near the end of the film when Henry Fonda's character, Gil Carter, reads aloud the letter that Donald Martin, one of the innocent men who was lynched, wrote to his wife before his execution. In this heartbreaking scene, Martin's words about law, justice, and conscience force the members of the lynch mob to confront what they've done, and the letter serves as the film's moral center, explicitly stating the themes that the entire story has been building toward. However, this crucial element of the film doesn't appear anywhere in Walter Van Tilburg Clark's original novel. In the book, Martin does write a letter to his wife, but the contents of that letter are never revealed to the reader. Clark chose to leave the letter's contents mysterious, letting readers imagine what Martin might have written in his final moments. Director William Wellman and screenwriter Lamar Trotty felt strongly that this approach wouldn't work for the film version. They believed it was essential to make Martin's message explicit and to give audiences the full weight of his words, rather than leaving them to speculation. So Trotty composed a letter specifically for the movie, and it's a powerful piece of writing that directly addresses the film's themes. Martin's letter talks about how law is more than just words in books or the people hired to enforce it, but rather everything people have ever found out about justice and what's right and wrong. He calls conscience the very conscience of humanity itself and argues that civilization cannot exist without it. The letter has become one of the most memorable aspects of the film, and it's hard to imagine the Oxbow Incident without this scene, yet it represents a significant addition to Clark's original story. Fact 13. John Ford's brother played a lynching victim. Among the three innocent men who are lynched in the Oxbow Incident, the character of Alva Hardwick, the senile old man who barely understands what's happening to him, is played by Francis Ford, an actor whose family connection to Hollywood royalty makes his appearance in this film particularly notable. Francis Ford was the elder brother and former mentor of the legendary director John Ford, one of the most important filmmakers in American cinema history. Francis was actually born Francis Joseph Feeney in Portland, Maine in 1881, 12 years before his younger brother Jack, who would later change his name to John Ford. Francis entered the film business first, working in New York and later moving to Hollywood, where he became a successful actor, writer, and director during the silent film era. He was one of the first filmmakers in Hollywood and directed himself in westerns, where he played characters like George Armstrong Custer, Sherlock Holmes, and Abraham Lincoln. In fact, Francis was the one who brought his younger brother into the movie business, assigning him to work with actor Harry Carey when Francis was head of Universal Film Manufacturing Company's Shorts and Serials department. This mentorship launched John Ford's career, though John would eventually far surpass his brother's fame and achievements. By the time the Oxbow Incident was filmed in 1942, Francis Ford's career as a director was long over, and he had spent the previous 2 decades working as a character actor and bit player, often in uncredited roles. His performance as the demented, senile Alva Hardwick in the Oxbow incident is considered one of his most memorable roles from this later period, even though he received no screen credit for it. According to some accounts, John Ford sent William Wellman a congratulatory note after seeing the film, praising it as one of the best pictures he had seen in years. Fact Act 14. Zanuck. Compared. Itiner to a Laurel and Hardy flop. Darrell F. Zanuck, the head of 20th Century Fox from 1935 to 1956, had been skeptical about the Oxbow incident from the very beginning, and when the film failed to perform well at the box office, his worst fears were confirmed. Years later, when looking back on the film, Zanuck offered a brutally frank assessment that revealed just how much of a commercial disappointment the studio considered it to be. Despite recognizing the film's significance and dramatic value, Zanuck called the Oxbow incident a flop and noted that the studio's records showed it had failed to pay its way financially. But the most cutting part of Zanuck's evaluation came when he compared the film's box office performance to another movie the studio had released around the same time. He said that the Oxbow incident's pulling power was less than that of a Laurel and Hardy comedy they made about the same time. This comparison to a slapstick comedy featuring the famous comedy duo of Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy was particularly stinging because it highlighted just how far the Oxbow incident had fallen short of commercial expectations. The film earned only $750,000 in the United States, which apparently wasn't enough to recoup its production costs despite the tight budget and cost-cutting measures that Zanuck had insisted upon. However, according to director William Wellman's autobiography, the picture eventually began to turn a profit after it was well received abroad and was re-released in the United States. Time has been much kinder to the Oxbow incident than the initial box office returns suggested it deserved, and the film is now recognized as one of the most important westerns in American cinema history, while few people today remember whatever Laurel and Hardy comedy Zanuck was referring to. Fact 15. Clint Eastwood calls it his favorite film. Among all the admirers that the Oxbow incident has gained over the decades since its release, perhaps none is more significant than Clint Eastwood, who has repeatedly named it as his all-time favorite film. When the American Film Institute polled Eastwood for its publication Private Screenings, asking him to name his favorite movies, he cited films from what he called the golden age of movies, the era when he was growing up. Eastwood specifically mentioned John Ford's How Green Was My Valley, William Wellman's The Oxbow Incident, and John Huston's The Treasure of the Sierra Madre as the films that would fit in there. Given that Eastwood went on to become one of Hollywood's most successful Western stars and directors, his admiration for the Oxbow incident carries particular weight. In a 2003 interview, Eastwood talked about the Oxbow incident being one of the first films of moral weight that he ever watched. He explained that he went in expecting a piece of entertainment, but instead found a film that explored serious themes like vigilante justice, racism, and even toxic masculinity. This showed the young Eastwood that movies could be more than just entertainment, that they could explore weightier topics and challenge audiences to think about difficult moral questions. The influence of the Oxbow incident can be seen throughout Eastwood's own career as a filmmaker. His revisionist Western Unforgiven deals with similar themes about violence and justice, while Hang 'Em High features Eastwood's character as the victim of a lynching who survives. Eastwood also credits some of director William Wellman's experimental techniques, particularly his framing of certain shots, as influences on his own directorial work. The fact that one of cinema's great Western icons considers this dark, unconventional film his favorite is a testament to its lasting power and influence.